I think teachers for me are, of course, particularly important because I went on to become first a high school teacher and then a college professor and now a college president. So it's been a long career path for me, but I think it really started out in second grade because I had rheumatic fever. And I was diagnosed early in the fall, probably October or something along that line. And the policy at my school was that if a student was out for a significant amount of the class time, that the person would just be retained, kept back for a year. And so the school principal informed my mother that I would be kept back and I would start the next. And her name was Lucille Schultz. And Mrs. Schultz said that she thought I was very bright, that I'd been in her class long enough, and she had tested me enough that she was aware that I was very bright. And she said that she thought it would be a shame for me to have to lose a whole year of schooling, that might affect me in adverse ways later on. So what she had offered to the principal was that she would come, if my parents were in agreement, to my house, and we lived way out in the country, so it wasn't convenient to her. She would come to our farmhouse on Friday afternoons after school, and she would tutor me, and she would test me with whatever tests and quizzes she had given to the regular class during the week. So my parents agreed to that, and that's what she did from the middle of the fall all the way through the school year. And the agreement was that I would be, a principal agreed that I could be promoted with my class, assuming that I was able to perform on all of the exams. So she would sit with me for the exams too, to make sure that she could attest to the fact that I had done it. It hadn't been my family. It's highly unlikely. So thanks to her, I was able to stay with my class and continue my work. And I think that was very important to me because particularly back in the time when I was in school, if you were left behind, there was a social stigma attached to that. So I thought that was very kind of her to do that. And she did it, of course, at no remuneration from the school, since it was not in keeping with school policy. Well, I think probably one of the things that I learned from her is to be a good listener and to connect people with each other. And I think that's something that people have commented that I do a very good job of, that I'm very good at listening to other people. I'm very good at hearing what people are interested in and connecting them up with other people who perhaps might help them. I do that with students today. I was talking with somebody this weekend. A couple of days ago, within the course of a day, there were 2 different students that I connected up with internship opportunities from talking with people who had openings, and then others, and then students that might fit those openings came to mind, and I connected people up, and it led to opportunities. So I think that at a very basic level is something that was probably generated from her putting me on the path. Well, I think that part of it is when I help people, I help in a collective sense rather than in an individual sense necessarily. And this is something that I learned from another person. When I was at the University of New Haven, there was a philosophy professor, and I was the Dean of Arts and Sciences. So as the Dean of Arts and Sciences, I had quite a bit of responsibility and opportunity to help people, just as I do now. And he told me, after observing me as dean for a period of time, a year or so, he said to me, "You know, I've noticed something about you." He said, "You make decisions fairly quickly, and you always seem really sure of yourself." And he said, "I've noticed that if people come to you and they have something that they want and it's totally self-interest, it would be good for them, and they talk about what they want, that you listen." But he said, then you start asking questions that would lead one to believe that what you're really interested in is what's good for them as an individual also good for the larger group that you're responsible for leading. So he said, you're really somebody that leads by looking to the collective good. And I think that's probably true about me. It's one of those things I had never really thought about, but when he started to talk about it, I thought, well, that is true. I do that. You know, if somebody wants something for himself and it doesn't harm anybody else, okay, I'm interested in that. But if it's something that will really help a whole group of people, then I'm even more interested. And that even relates to probably fundraising on this campus. One of the things that I've talked with people about is it's not that I'm disinterested in scholarships, but I had 3 scholarships myself, so I mean I value them, but scholarships help an individual student. And there are other kinds of donations that will help scores of students. And so if it's a donation that will help a great many students and do good across campus, then I'm really interested in that. So that's the idea of the collective good, I guess, in addition to just helping. Well, I think a lot of it, to me, relates to what you talk about in terms of listening, Mark. Because if you listen to somebody intently, then there are bound to be things that they're saying that touch a chord, because we all have different experiences. And so I think, heartfelt is when there's a chord of some kind of goodness inside of you that gets touched. And then you decide that you're gonna support that person, you're gonna help that person, because it's the right thing to do, it's the principled thing to do. So I think that's what it touches for me. So for example, I was asked on a radio show recently, why Rhode Island College? Why am I particularly wedded to Rhode Island College? And my education has all been at state institutions, various types. And what I'm particularly touched by is institutions that can take a student who has promise, but doesn't come from a wealthy background, just has sort of raw potential. And I'm very touched at the opportunity to develop that person. So now that has to do with my own background. It has to do with what Lucille Schultz did for me. It has to do with what I see the faculty on this campus doing. So you would find heartfelt leaders, I think, within our faculty all across campus. We had a donor who came, potential donor, I should say, and I was explaining to him that I really, really love leading this institution because its mission really is to work primarily with students that are Rhode Islanders who have great promise that could be developed, and that the faculty work here for salaries much less than they could get at other places because of the gratification that they feel in working with youngsters that they can develop. And he looked at me, and I could tell by the expression on his face he didn't believe me. He thought that that was a line that I was giving a potential donor. So I took him on a tour of campus, and the first faculty member that we met is a wonderful woman who's African American, who has a PhD from Cornell in business. And our salaries are not high here. Uniformly, they're not high, as I told you. And so he said to her, well, why do you work here? You must have opportunities. And she said, oh, I've worked at other institutions. But she said, I really love being here because I feel so gratified at what I'm able to do for students who come from very modest economic means, but have a real fire in their bellies to succeed and real potential. So she said, I feel good at the end of every day about what I've been able to do for them. And then we went on and we met another professor, and they all had pretty much the same stories. Great PhDs from great institutions, wonderful publication records, but they really loved being here because they loved being able to do something good for the type of student that we have. I didn't tell you about Aunt Agnes. Aunt Agnes was my 98-year-old aunt who only had, I think, a 5th grade education, but worked in World War II. So she was working for Kodak, and Kodak was doing something related to bomb making that was top secret, and so they sent her off to some facility that was like she described it as being almost like a dormitory where they all lived and they stayed away from their families for long periods of time. And she said that because my aunt was very clever, very smart, as was my father. My father had patents for General Motors that they would pay him $50 for. They were called suggestions. But she had great ideas, very creative. And so, but they wanted her to learn how to read blueprints because they could move her, she said, to the next level if she could read blueprints and didn't have to be dependent on other people. She told me that she was afraid to try to do that because she had no education. So one of the things she always said to me when I was young was not to be afraid. That if somebody said to you, would you like to try X? Not to say, oh, I don't think I can do that. She said, try it. what have you got to lose? Because she said, if you try it and you can't do it, well, okay, so you couldn't do it. But if you don't try it, you've automatically lost out without ever giving it a chance. And so I've kind of followed that philosophy, and when anybody has offered me an opportunity to try something new, I've always done it. So, so I have a very, very long, tedious bio because I've done a great many different, vastly different kinds of things in my career. And all of those things have helped me, Mark, at one time or another, because I've worked for business and industry, I've worked in the Middle East, I've done all types of things that again help me connect people up with each other that I think might be able to support and help each other. So I guess that's my final thought. And so I say thank you to Aunt Agnes too, even though she's not with us anymore.